Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to talk about why anxious, preoccupied folks are so afraid to speak up for themselves. And if any of you guys have booked a call with me and I mentioned this to you, you know what I'm talking about. And if you booked a call with me and I haven't mentioned this to you, it's probably because it doesn't apply to you. But I do see some of you guys do struggle with this. And so that's why I'm making a video on it, because it's been happening a little bit more recently with a lot of the folks that I'm seeing. And so I wanted to share this with you just to share more information. And some fearful avoidants are like this too, but usually they lean anxious, what I've noticed. And their resentment that they build with fearful avoidance, it does seem different than those who are anxious preoccupied, okay? But in general, both of them, they tend to not speak up for themselves, partly because of the fact that they feel that there will be some consequence if they speak up. With fearful avoidance particularly, they do tend to do this also because there's a part of them that's they're secretive of their inner emotions and they're uncomfortable expressing themselves. So that part is just fearful avoidance do that. But both anxious, preoccupied, and fearful avoidance, what they do is they don't speak up because they feel like there's going to be a consequence, okay? And so let's break up some of those consequences and process it so that you guys can at least have some awareness of where this is coming from. Because if you stay in this cycle, what actually happens is it works backwards for you, especially if you're with a dismissive avoidant or fearful avoidant that leans dismissive. What happens is, if you don't speak up for yourself, they actually don't know what you want. And dismissive avoidance and fearful leaning dismissive, they are very instruction based. And if you are not speaking up for yourself, there is no instructions. And so they don't actually know what to do to make you happy. You might speak up in an emotion, but that is not the same as an instruction. And emotions happen usually after you're already frustrated. So it's unclear because you're already flooded with those emotions. So the first reason why so many anxious, preoccupied individuals are afraid to speak up for themselves is fear of abandonment. Speaking up might feel like you're going to push people away and you're afraid that it will cause rejection. You're afraid that that person you care about, that person you love will leave you. And so you think, I'd rather just not say anything. But what happens is you're abandoning yourself. And that fear of abandonment, some of it is being recognized because you are abandoning who you truly are. You're putting somebody else more important than yourself. It makes sense that you don't want to speak up all the time or at certain times because maybe your partner's stressed or maybe you feel like this topic, you're still not fully processed what you want to talk about. That's okay. That's normal. However, you don't want it to be where you are holding on to an emotion for years and you're really frustrated because you're afraid they're going to leave you. So you just don't say anything, even though you know that some things that they're doing are just not good. And there's nothing that is going to come good out of it. And so it's better to speak up about it, but you don't. The next one is you're highly sensitive towards others' reactions. Okay. And so a lot of people who are anxious, preoccupied feel this way. Fearful avoidance do too, but we're going to talk about fearful avoidance after we talk about this point because fearful avoidants have a slightly different reason, but I'll talk about that. With anxious preoccupied, they often are very acute to these things because they're afraid of that disapproval and abandonment. And often they're afraid that certain tones or certain behaviors mean something. And they're trying to make meaning of it to heal that fear of uncertainty. And so that is why so many anxious preoccupied are very sensitive to other people's reactions. And so they're actually afraid to speak up for themselves because they are afraid what they're going to see, what they're going to learn about the other person. And they're afraid that that will mean that that person doesn't like them. With fearful avoidance, sometimes what happens is they're actually afraid to speak up for themselves because they're afraid to be abused, to be mistreated, to be taken advantage of. And that's because in their childhood, that's what they experienced. And so that's a much stronger trauma response. Typically, fearful avoidants have a lot more trauma based on the childhood, the adverse childhood experiences scale. And that's actually what forms fearful attachment style. That's how you know that you're a disorganized / fearful avoidant. You have certain types of trauma that the other two insecure attached folks don't have, okay? Even if it's just one event. Some people think if it's a fearful avoidant, it's like constant. Sometimes, yeah, but sometimes it's just one really traumatic event that really changes their attachment style, okay? The next one is conflict feels like potential abandonment, okay? And this usually occurs over time, and this one is a little more common with fearful leaning anxious, but it does happen with anxious preoccupied as well. You start feeling like if I bring things up, we're going to have conflict, and this person's going to be mad at me, and they're going to not like me anymore. They're not going to respect me anymore. They're not going to feel like I'm valuable. They're going to leave me. And disagreement feels like it's a potential to where you guys can break up. And a lot of fearful avoidants who lean anxious or anxious preoccupied, they get this way through the relationship. They didn't start that way. And it's partly because you're with an avoidant who doesn't like conflict in general. But another reason is that as you get more attached to a person, you're more afraid to lose them. And so you get more locked in terms of ways to continue gaining their approval. The next one is you've learned self-silencing, okay? This is common with both fearful avoidance and anxious preoccupied. Your past experiences have basically taught you that keeping quiet keeps relationships stable. And for fearful avoidance, it also means it keeps you safe. I just want you to understand, and I'm sorry that you've experienced that. Most people, like if your parents physically harmed you if you spoke up for yourself, they're not normal people. They should have been in jail. It's a crime. But you might not realize that because that's what you grew up with. Okay? And so you think that these things are normal. And so you think somewhere subconsciously self-silencing is the way you protect yourself. But if you silence yourself, you're not properly vetting out abnormal people. You don't know if that person is capable of doing what your parents did to you, for example, because you're not showing that potential. You're not giving them that opportunity. And the scariest part about this is if you start a relationship where you're silent, you can be with a person for 3 years and you don't realize what they're capable of because you never spoke up. And it's a lot harder to leave a relationship when you're already really ingrained with that person. And so any person who struggles with this, break out of that slowly as you can. Of course, it's going to be a little bit difficult, but speak up for your opinions. Have an opinion. Share something you don't like. Say no. Every now and again, practice, because silencing yourself is going to hurt you in the long run, okay? The next one is a lot of people who are anxiously preoccupied. They have a very strong need for approval and closeness, okay? Some even admiration. Maintaining connection feels more urgent than expressing your own personal needs. It's the opposite of avoidance, particularly dismissive avoidance. What feels more urgent for them is expressing their needs. I need space. I need, you to stop talking about this. This is making me feel overwhelmed. I don't want to have this discussion. For them, personal needs are more important than connection. Anxious preoccupied are the other way around. And so what happens is in a relationship, if you're anxious preoccupied and you're with a dismissive avoidant, it's always going their way because they care about their needs and then you care about connection. And you think connection means maintaining their needs. And so both of you guys need to sometimes meet in the middle. Sometimes anxious preoccupied, you need to start prioritizing your personal needs, and dismissive avoidant, you need to start prioritizing maintaining connection. That's that balance, okay? The next one is you have a low trust in your needs. Over time, you may doubt if your feelings are worth it, if they're valid, if this is even a normal thing to ask for. But the reality of it is if you feel it, give it a chance. And if your partner says that's too much, you can say, okay, what part of it feels too much? Let me know. Hear them out. But if what they say in their explanation doesn't check out, then maybe they're, at this particular point, maybe they're the one that's a little bit off, right? You want to process what it really is that is too much and what's not too much. Ask other people. Ask friends, ask family members, talk to a professional about it. That would be the best option, right? Talk to a professional, because actually this is true. A lot of patients come to me, and if you guys want to book a call with me, that's in the description box and it's pinned in the comments. But a lot of patients ask me, is this too much to ask? Is this normal to ask in a relationship? Do you deal with things like this? And usually it's something that's very normal to ask. In fact, it's recommended for your mental health, but they don't know that. And so it's really important that you ask people who know the healthy relationship dynamics, are trained in those things, okay? The next one is fear of emotional withdrawal. This one's really unfortunate because I see this more often with people who have been with avoidance or people with a personality disorder for a really long time. You're actually afraid that if you speak up, your partner is going to withdraw. And I want to really point out that this actually does happen if you're with an avoidant, but even scarier, if you're with a narcissist, they might do this as well. For different reasons. Avoidants do it because they're feeling very overwhelmed. Narcissists actually do it because they're trying to punish you. Okay. And so that's scary. But what I want you to understand is if they're doing that, you can figure out who they are, right? We've talked about that earlier in this video. By you not expressing your emotions, you can't find out who this person really is. And if they're a dismissive avoidant, once they feel a little bit less flooded, call them out. Mention, by the way, Is there a better way of me to express myself? Because I notice whenever I'm trying to express myself, you actually become a little distant. And I don't feel like it's a safe space for my emotions, but I know that that's not what you mean. So what can I do so that you can build up more tolerance? But at the same time, I'm also hoping that you can get more comfortable building up tolerance. What's a middle ground? Have that conversation, because it's the right thing to do for yourself and for the relationship. Okay, so let's summarize and we'll wrap it up. Why are anxious, preoccupied, and sometimes fearful leaning anxious so afraid to speak up for themselves? Fear of abandonment, high sensitivity to others' reactions. Fear of conflict, like you feel like conflict is potential abandonment, not necessarily fear of the conflict itself. Learn self-silencing, a strong need for closeness rather than personal needs. Low trust in their own needs, and fear of emotional withdrawal. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.